If you're walking through grief right now or loving someone who is, well, you already know that loss just doesn't happen to one person. It happens to an entire family. Today's guest, Karen Whiting, has lived that reality in a very personal way. 1 year ago, Karen's younger son in law died suddenly from bronchitis at just 47 years old. He left behind Karen's younger daughter and their 5 children, and it was his 13-year-old daughter who found him. And the shock and heartbreak that followed, both sides of the family had a choice: to pull away or to pull together. What unfolded over that first year was a picture of what traditional, connected family can look like when it rallies around one another in grief, through both the big, obvious moments and the small, quiet ones. Karen, she has a deep passion for helping families be intentional about these kinds of support systems long before crisis hits, because strong family bonds can make such a difference in our mental and emotional health. Today, we're talking about how health goes beyond the individual to the whole family, how we can show up for one another in grief, and how to begin building the kind of support many of us wish we had. Let's step into Elisha's space with my guest, Karen Whiting. Welcome, Karen. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Uh, I'm very thankful to be here, Elisha.
Thank you so much as you're comfortable. Can you share your story? What has evolved?
Right. Well, the very beginning, I was walking out of church, talking to friends about going out to lunch when I got a call from my daughter, and she's just crying and said, "Frank's dead. What do I do? He's not breathing." And I said, "You call 911." And she said, "But he's not breathing." And I said, "Darlene, you have to call them because they have to come and examine the body and take the body away." And, because she was in such a panic and such shock. So we hung up. I said, "I'm hanging up. You call now." And I called my older daughter who was walking out of church and said, "You're not gonna believe it, but Darlene's husband, Frank, died." And of course, she was shocked by that. And I said, "But I need you to listen." I mentioned that I what happened with that call, and I said, "Would you wait 10 minutes and call and make sure she called 911?" Because if I called her right back, she'd think I was nagging. If Rebecca did, it would be okay. Plus, I knew Rebecca was the closest of our family to drive there, that she could get there in 5 to 6 hours. It would normally have been 4 hours, but because of Hurricane Helene, there were roads that they couldn't use. And she did that and told her they were leaving within an hour, and they got there by basically supper time. And then I, tried calling her father-in-law, didn't get him, tried her sister-in-law, didn't get her, and then tried some of my other family members of my other children, and either got them or got a message they had to call me back. I didn't wanna just say over the phone what had happened. It happened that Frank's dad had left his own home that day from church. His sister-in-law was in the choir, and she waited, but with the second time, after I called, Darlene's oldest son, who had turned 20 the week before, called, and she said, "Something's going on." And she walked out to the parking lot and called him back. And that got everybody in motion because she was only 2.5, 3 hours away. She got there after Rebecca and Larry got there, but that got people moving forward on what was happening.
My goodness. My goodness. Wow.
Well, and then Darlene also, after talking to Rebecca, 'cause and I don't know if one of us said, "Do you have a friend who can come over?" And she called Honor because now this is really unusual. 5 months before Frank died, 4 or 5 months, Honor's husband died, leaving 4 children, and a month later, another friend in their same homeschool group, the father died, leaving 7 children, but 2 were already grown, but the youngest was only 7. And so they knew what it was like. They had just experienced it, and both of those were rather shocking too. So that got their community moving forward. Mhm.
Um, all around all of that, you know?
Right.
Right.
And
So
Honor came in minutes. Plus, she and some friends set up a meal train and a fundraiser for them within an hour of knowing.
wow. 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 Has your family always been like this? Like, how would you describe yourself and your family? Have you guys always been
I grew up
or
in a very close family that all lived in the same community up in Connecticut, and they were always there to help one another out. With
right.
my family, we were military, we moved around, so we also had military family, but we
Mhm.
were always helping, and I can look back and say that when Michael was having a problem and his wife, Kim, had to have brain surgery and, Rebecca, the oldest daughter, called me
Mhm.
and said, "Do you want me to come over?" She was only a couple hours away, "and be there
Mhm.
with the children." He says, "Oh, I think I'm gonna stay home with the kids, and Kim will go with her parents." But then he called back and said, "No, I really wanna be there with Kim." So Rebecca and her husband, Larry, went over to take care of the children while Kim was a couple hours away for her brain tumor surgery. And things would always happen like this, that somebody would pick up the ball and help others, and I can remember when my grandfather had a heart attack in Miami and we were from Connecticut, that my mother, as a nurse, was the one who went down to be with him, and my aunts around us helped meals for us and helped us out while she was gone.
My goodness. So you know what? That's why it's so important to have strong family systems that matter. What would you say were some strengths that came from all of that? If you guys didn't have that, I don't know what you guys would have done.
Yes, well, her in-laws, her father and mother-in-law, came and they stayed for a month with her. Well, they didn't
Wonderful.
stay at her house, they stayed nearby and were with them and prayed and sang. Frank and his family did a lot of singing, a lot of music, and so they sang with them all the time, and that really helped out and saw what they could do. When Rebecca and her husband, Larry, now her husband is a pastor, but he was on sabbatical, and so he didn't have to worry about church and staying around, he could just go, and that's what they did. And when they got there, Rebecca said, she doesn't know what to do for anything. And I said, well, can you help talk to the funeral home and get a plot? They don't even have a plot. And so they were doing all that. And I said, but I'm going to pay for it all because they don't have the money right now. And she's not going to really have the money. So I had decided that right away. I mean, her in laws said, what can we help with? But they were going through their own rough patch on that. And I thought, no, I will do this. But then as I was praying, I thought, her cars are not new. I'm going to do one more thing. And I said, Darlene, when I'm there, when I get there for the funeral, I'll stay, enough time that I want to have both of your cars looked at and see what needs to happen. First, have Larry, who was very good in mechanics, look, and then we'll take care of it. One of the cars was so bad off, she had to get it replaced. She says, what am I going to do? I don't know where to find a car. I can't buy a new car. And I said, check with Honor because she's in the homeschool community with you and they might know someone who's getting ready to trade in or sell their van. Turns out Honor, because her husband had died, but his estate was in probate and it was just getting ready to come through. She says, "Here, take his van. We never use it. And when we're through with probate, I'll tell you how much to pay." And I said, "All right, Darlene, take that car over, have it checked out." And it needed some work. And I said, "Well, I'll pay for it, but ask if she wants to take that off the price." Because she said, "I'm going to go as low, but the lawyer might not let me go too low." And she got the car, really good condition car, at a great price.
Wow. Wow. It looks like, you know, some of the small things actually made a huge impact between the texts, the meals, the rides, the staying on the phone, even the situation with Honor. That was a major way that you guys were to build connection with one another.
Yes, and when we were at the wake, Honor and other people made sure they came over, gave me their information, and I got to know who they were, and that was really good too. And, in fact, when I was up later on for Easter and Mother's Day, one of them wanted to take me out to lunch and get to know me a little bit better. I mean, they're just so supportive and loving.
And you had also when we were talking before, you had talked about the grandson, how they wanted the first Christmas, the whole family to be together. Can you share what that was like?
Yes. Well, you know when? Frank died. It had been 2 or 3 years since we had Christmas together where we went to North Carolina where the older daughter lives. It's more central for everyone to get there, and we had rented, the what we needed in an Airbnb, and in doing that, I thought, "I wonder if she's gonna want that," and I put that out to her, not then, but probably a month later, "If you want Christmas together, let us know." And
Mhm.
everyone in the family was saying, "Do you think she's gonna want to?" I said, "Just save the time so that we can if she wants to." And I don't think it was till October or November she finally said, "Mom, the kids really, really wanna do it." Thomas said, "No one does Christmas like Grandma Karen." And things like and so we already had an idea we were gonna do it. It was near where Rebecca lives, so she checked into places and found a place that we could be at. And my older 2 sons said, "We don't wanna stay at the same place because Darlene's children stay up too late for some of our James's younger children." He said, "We're gonna get our own place, and we'll be very nearby." And they did that. So, it all worked out, and I set up with Rebecca, what meals are we gonna do, talked with Darlene to make sure that would be okay, and I knew that when we got there, Rebecca and I would do most of the cooking, but other people would help as needed, especially some of Darlene's children really liked to cook. Frank had taught them a lot of cooking, and so did Darlene. But there was one day that I was really tired, and I think my sons noticed, the older 2, because they said, "Oh, mom, you can get out of the kitchen. We're gonna take over and do everything." And I had all the stuff out there, but they just took over the meal. And that's what the family's like. They look and they say, "Hey, we need to do this."
Regarding your son-in-law and his passing, did you guys intentionally create ways to remember him, especially during those hard times with holidays and things like that? Or did they just naturally emerge and happen for you guys?
They somewhat naturally emerged. I mean, someone asked for the photos for the funeral, the wake to be able to put up a slideshow. And I went through all my photos and found them, and everyone did that. And we had a central person to send them to. I think it went to Anna, Frank's oldest, no, sister next to him in age. And then because music was such a big part they had at the funeral home, they were able to have uh, time that a singspiration, you might say, where we were able to gather during the wake and just sing and do his songs. But even when that was going on, and Darlene was sitting with some of her children, others were going to be up there to help sing. James, my middle son, whose wife couldn't make it, looked and noticed that Darlene was starting to cry, and he just moved over and put his arm around her and sat with her the whole time. So those little things where they notice, what can I do? And they just do it.
What differences did you see in your daughter and your grandchildren because they had such strong family around them?
Well, I saw that they didn't mind leaning on somebody if they needed to, and that when someone was there, they would play games. One of the reasons they wanted to get together for Christmas is we did that a number of times, and every time we did, Frank and my sons, the men usually got together with all the kids and played board games. And so they liked that, and they even told their Uncle Michael which games they wanted that they didn't have at their house for him to bring, and he brought those up. So that was, he came up by train actually, so he gave me a suitcase with those games in it for me to take back because Michael only lives 4 miles from me. But it's that type of coordination, you just ask and they're going to say yes.
Oh, that is so nice. How did you notice each child grieving differently, and how did the family make room for those differences?
Well, I noticed immediately when I knew that Joseph, the oldest one, had called his aunt. I thought, "Okay, he's already taking over as the man of the house." And I noticed that when I was there anytime that if there were things that had to be done that might be hard for Darlene, he was just gonna do that, and that was a good thing. I also noticed the youngest who had the biggest trauma, she found the body,
Mm.
Julia, that she would not go into the part of the wake with the casket at all. She stayed out front, talked to all the funeral directors and the people working there, and it's interesting that since then, she's decided she might actually wanna work in a funeral home or do something in that field of, work, and that was a big surprise to me, but when I went and stayed with them in the spring, I noticed particularly what each was doing, that Julia would go into bed in the evening when everybody else was playing board games and start playing on her guitar, and she was writing songs and singing songs, and some of them were, songs that had to do with death and life, and I would go back there because that's the room I was staying in, and that's when she would talk to me and tell me what songs she liked and talk more through the language of songs and the words in the songs than anything. But Darlene also said each of them in their own way came to her at different times.
Mhm. Mhm.
And their son Thomas, who was 15, he started doing more at church of being an usher, and I think he liked that because he was with these older men who were surrounding him in their own way.
Mhm.
And Joseph also, I think he didn't wanna go with the youth group and only had to take that semester off and be home and do it from home just because of the logistics, and he was supposed to fly back the day his dad died, and we knew it'd be 3 weeks to the funeral because the coroner's office takes that long when someone's under 50 and they die suddenly at home to do the autopsy. They have extra things to do. But he joined a men's group at church because he was 20 at that point and he could do that. And so both of those boys sought after male father figures immediately because of the loss of their dad.
Wow. Thank goodness they were available and there for them.
Yes. Well, and Darlene said, "I don't know what I'm gonna do." Frank t I homeschool, and Frank was teaching them their science, and I said, "Well, is there somebody in the homeschool market that's really good in their homeschool group?" And she found somebody who says, "Oh, yeah, I'd love to teach them their chemistry and physics." And they're taking the physics right now, but they were doing that with her, and so, again, the community picked up on things that they needed.
Amazing. Many families, they don't have this kind of support system. You know, in your view, what gets in the way?
Some people are afraid to ask for help.
Mm,
Some people don't even know how to put into words what it is that they need,
true.
and they're not sure what to say, what to do, and then there's the fact you have 5 children. Who's gonna wanna
Right.
help somebody with that many children?
Right.
Will people bring meals? Will they understand what to bring? Because of the homeschool community, a lot of those families had large families, and that helped them out. And because my children grew up I have 5 children, my 5 understood what do you do to help one another.
Well, listen, if for someone who realizes, I don't have this kind of family support or community support, how can they where can they start to try to build that? Do
I
you
think they need to
suggest?
go to their church and start joining groups now before they have a death, before they
Right.
have a great need, so they get to have some friends and people they know. They should also be close to neighbors. Darlene also had neighbors who were very nice and helped out, and when I came in the spring and she wanted me to help plant flowers, they were the ones who brought over and gave her fertilizer and dumped it down for them and other things to prepare for that. I mean, there were just so many people, but you have neighbors. Hopefully, you're in some sort of group like she had that homeschool group, and you may or may not have a big family like she has. One of the people I called in our family, not it wasn't Larry, it was a cousin of mine that because he's pastor, I knew that was who she wanted to have do the funeral service. And I called, well, I no, I said, he's at church all day. I'll call his mother. So I called my aunt. And as soon as he got there for dinner, he called me to say, when is it? What can I do? I'll be there. It's all those things that happened.
Something that you mentioned that I think is extremely important is the fact that be intentional about building your community before you get into a situation where you're needing community. And it's just opening yourself up to talk. And in this world, it feels like we are very much more introverts than we are extroverts. We don't tend to say hi to our neighbor or get to know our neighbors a little bit. We don't tend to, even when you go to family functions, you just focus on yourself, your your partner, and your children. We don't necessarily, it's like we've lost that connection. So what
Right.
would you say to someone who feels alone and doesn't have family? How can they build their chosen family or support network, especially in situations where maybe the family system is dysfunctional?
Right. And that's so true. I grew up with a grandmother 2 houses from me. They had the only restaurant in town, did a lot of baking and cooking, and I can remember when a new neighbor came into town, she would be making bread, and I'd go and say, "Grandma, why do you always make 2 loaves of bread?" And she says, "Because there's always someone who needs a loaf of bread."
Oh, I
And
love
she
that.
pulled out her
Right.
calendar and showed me how she circled 3 and 6 months after her death and brought bread to the people at those dates too, not just when somebody first died, and would bring it over because she also said, "And then people like to sit and talk around bread." So she would do this, and I find for Christmas, I bring all my neighbors bread, and when somebody new moves in, I'll bring them bread or cookies or something, and so just a few months ago, when we had new neighbors move in, afterwards, they thought, "We need to know someone that we've gotta exchange phone numbers because we ended up being out longer than we needed, and we needed somebody to go back to our house to take care of the cat." And so they got hold of me because I had reached out to them when they came. And that's when you start building, you just greet them and do something nice for them.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So, around building support systems, it's so important to be watchful around ways to build up your community, being careful to see. So, audience, you can do things like, Karen, you brought up something amazing when you talked about joining groups at the church, building relationships. What it is relationship building. And the thing is about relationships that relationships are not transactional. It's about sharing space and time with other people. And to be quite frank with you, I feel like that's something we've missed, overall as a society that we really need to get back to.
Yes, yeah,
Because, go ahead.
after COVID, our church and I hadn't been here that long. It was a new area for me, decided to start an over 40 group. And I can remember this one deacon's wife who said to me, "Hey, I think you'd be good for this group." So I joined in the planning committee to get that group started. And I'm
Hmm.
still in that. And that's what we find because I mean, we're over 40, but a lot of the people who come are over 70 and over 80. And they get support there. And it's a big fellowship group. But we have the spiritual speaker and we have other things that are spiritual tied in that day. But we notice and we ask for the prayer needs of people. And since then, there have been several people who either died or lost their spouse. And we've been able to help them come around that because our leader gets to really build these relationships and know that they can go out and say, "What do you need?"
Right. And that's what it is. It's all about building relationships. It's all about building connection. So that's what's really what it's all about. And that's what we need to really, be focusing on is within that building. And I do think a lot of it also had to do with COVID as well, you know. But I even think it was before COVID because, like with
Mhm.
the kids wouldn't go outside and play. They would play on their digital. And there's nothing wrong. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with playing video games, and there's nothing wrong with, you know, being in the digital world. I'm in the digital world. My profession, the podcast, we are a digital podcast, So I have nothing, there's nothing wrong with that. But the other side of that is you have to have balance, you know.
Yes.
And I don't believe that God created us to be isolated. I believe that God created us to be social beings. A great example of that through scripture is with Elijah. When Elijah went to when after he performed these great miracles, he went to the cave. He hid himself in the cave. And one of the first things the Lord asked him, he let him stay there for a minute because I guess he needed to decompress or whatever. But he asked him, he said, Elijah, why are you here? What are you doing here? You know, so we're not supposed to be isolated. We're not supposed to be alone. We are supposed to build connection. And it sounds like what happened with, my condolences, first of all, for the loss. It's a significant loss. It actually sounds like this is a man who was very much loved and cared for, you know.
Yes.
Um, but at that same time, you deserve to have someone in your life you deserve to have people around you who support each other, who build community with each other. And that's really what got you and
Yes.
your family through this difficult time. And audience, you deserve that too. But the way to nurture that is to build community. You know, I
Right.
love the idea of making bread, 2 loaves of bread, 1 for the neighbor, then 1 for yourself, and then having conversations over a loaf of bread. You know, it's just being kind to other people and taking out time to really get to know them so that if something happens, it's noticed. It's noticed. I think about Karen, someone I went to college with, and she was a very withdrawn person. She didn't have a lot of connections and things of that nature. And when she passed, no one knew she passed. She was in the apartment for her apartment. She was young, in her 20s, and she was in her apartment, and no one knew she passed.
That's
It
tragic,
was,
and I've
yeah.
had known other people that somebody that they knew that happened to, and it's so sad, and we need to build up. I mean, I have adopted children. My older daughter, Rebecca, has 2 adopted girls. She adopted them when they were older, and
Mhm.
I can remember when one of them said, "Well, no one's ever gonna be my family. Their grandma she's not gonna be my grandma, they're not gonna be my aunts and uncles," but Frank actually was one of them, the one who had said that when she was pregnant and she asked me some questions, I answered some things and I said, "But you know what? You should talk to your Uncle Frank because he's a doctor." I mean, he's a
Mhm.
nurse. He'd studied to be a doctor. He didn't end up getting a residency. And so it ended up when he was a traveling nurse, they would often spend an hour or so on the phone while he was driving talking because she wanted help with things. And she
Mhm.
realized he's really great, but he was willing to do that with people and find out how they were doing. And that's part of who Frank was, and again, a hole for a lot of people.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. If someone wants to connect with you, how can you do that? And before you answer that question, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you feel is important for people to understand or know about building family support systems?
I would say what you have to do is don't ever hold a grudge. Remember to forgive.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
make reach out. If someone's not talking to you, you can send them a card every month, every few weeks. And you know what? I've seen that rebuild bridges for people. Just write something happy on it, send them a little happy card. And that's all you have to do sometimes to bridge the gap and to build that relationship. So do that. Yeah, they can get hold of me. You know, I'm an author of a lot of books. This is my Growing a Mother's Heart because which has a lot to do with support and community. So they can go to my website, KarenWhiting.com, contact me through there. They can find me on Facebook, Karen Whiting, and it might be Karen H. Whiting there. And I'm happy to respond when people send me things. And I did have someone was on radio one time and somebody got back and sent me this whole long email and I was sick and I said, I'll get back to you when I'm not sick. And when I went to go back, the email had disappeared and I couldn't get back to them. So if they're going to get in contact with me, if I don't get back to them right away, be persistent. It's okay. I don't mind. My computer may have lost that email. It does every so often.
Well, Karen, I just want to thank you for joining us today. Your story, it just gives us such a tender, practical picture of what family can look like when we're going through a storm. In this case, it's grief. It's not perfect, but it's present. So I just want to thank you so much for coming onto the show. And audience, if you'd like to explore more of Karen's work and check out her website. She is an author of many books, and we will have that book definitely on the show notes. So if this conversation stirred something in you, maybe a longing for deeper support or an idea for how you could show up for someone else, take one small step and just do it. Give a family member a call, offer up a practical skill to someone, ask someone how you can help, and maybe just really be someone who's available to listen if someone just needs to bend an ear. I want to thank you for spending this time with us in Elisha's space. And if Karen's story encourages you, share this episode or subscribe with someone who can use the support. And make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss future gentle, honest conversations like this. Until next time, be kind to your heart. And remember, you don't have to walk through loss alone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us at Elisha's Space.